Zara's three hearts hammered against her ribcage as the human's massive form loomed over her broken body. The battlecruiser's emergency lighting cast harsh shadows across his scarred face, making him appear even more terrifying than the stories had warned. Blood trickled from a gash above her left eye, and her right arm hung at an unnatural angle, where the plasma blast had caught her during the final assault on the bridge. She had heard the tales whispered in the outer colonies. Humans were savage beasts who showed no mercy to their enemies. They were known to torture prisoners for information, to consume the flesh of fallen foes, and to collect trophies from their victims. The Zeridian Council had briefed her squadron extensively on human cruelty before this mission. They were monsters wearing the masks of civilization. The human stepped closer, his heavy boots crunching on the scattered debris from their desperate last stand. Captain Thorne of the Earth Defense Fleet was a legend among his own kind, and a nightmare among hers. His reputation preceded him across 3 star systems. The Butcher of Kepler Station, they called him. The man who had single-handedly held off an entire Zeridian assault fleet while civilian transports evacuated. Zara tried to reach for the plasma knife at her belt, but her broken arm refused to obey. Pain shot through her nervous system like liquid fire, and she gasped, her breathing shallow and labored. The human noticed her movement and crouched down, bringing his face level with hers. She could see the weariness in his dark eyes, the lines etched by years of warfare, the small scars that told stories of countless battles. This was it. This was how she would die. Far from her homeworld, far from her clutch siblings bleeding out on the deck of an enemy vessel. She thought of her mother, of the traditional farewell blessing she would never receive. She thought of the young ones in her care, who would never know what happened to their guardian. The human reached toward her, and Zara squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the killing blow. She had seen what humans did to prisoners. The holovids from Arcturus Prime still haunted her dreams, bodies twisted in agony, faces frozen in eternal screams. She would not beg. She would not give this monster the satisfaction of her tears, but the killing blow never came. Instead, she felt something cool and metallic being pressed gently into her functioning hand. Her eyes snapped open in confusion. The human had placed a small medical injector in her palm, its blue indicator light showing it was loaded with universal healing serum, the same serum her own medics use for battlefield injuries. "The pain will stop in a few minutes," the human said, his voice unexpectedly gentle. "Try not to move your arm until the bone regeneration kicks in." Zara stared at him in shock, her mind unable to process what was happening. This had to be some kind of trick, some elaborate form of psychological torture. Humans were incapable of compassion. Everyone knew that. The propaganda broadcast had made it clear. They were a plague upon the galaxy, a species that knew only violence and conquest. "Why?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the dying hum of the ship's systems. Captain Thorne sat back on his heels, studying her face with those unnervingly human eyes. "Because you fought bravely," he said simply. "Because you stayed at your post even when the rest of your crew abandoned the bridge. Because you're someone's daughter, and they deserve to see you come home." The words hit her like a physical blow. How could this creature speak of daughters and homecoming? How could something so supposedly monstrous understand the bonds between parent and child? Her breathing became more ragged, not from pain now, but from the cognitive dissonance tearing at her worldview. The medical injector hissed as the healing compound entered her bloodstream. Almost immediately, the sharp edges of agony began to dull. She could feel her broken bones starting to knit together, the torn flesh beginning to regenerate. It was human technology, but it was saving her life. "My crew needs medical attention," the human continued, rising to his full height. "But so does yours. There's a medical bay 3 decks down. My medics will treat your people alongside mine." Zara tried to speak, but no words came. Everything she had been taught, everything she believed about these beings was crumbling around her like the debris scattered across the deck. The human who should have been her executioner was instead offering her salvation. Captain Thorne turned to leave, then paused at the shattered viewport. The stars beyond showed the aftermath of their battle, debris fields where proud warships had once sailed. "War makes monsters of us all, Lieutenant," he said without looking back. "But we don't have to stay monsters." As his footsteps echoed down the corridor, Zara remained on the deck, staring at the medical injector in her hand. The small device seemed to weigh more than a battleship's armor plating. In her palm lay the physical proof that everything she had been told about humans was wrong. They were capable of mercy. They were capable of compassion. She thought of the young ones back home, of the stories she had always told them about the evil humans who threatened their way of life. What would she tell them now? How could she explain that the monster in her story had chosen to heal rather than harm? The healing serum continued its work, mending not just her broken body but somehow beginning to heal something deeper. A crack had formed in the wall of hatred that had been built around her heart, and through that crack the first light of understanding began to shine. Outside, the stars bore silent witness to a moment that would change everything. 3 days had passed since the battle, and Zara found herself in the strangest prison she had ever imagined. The medical bay of the human vessel looked nothing like the sterile torture chambers she had expected. Soft lighting emanated from panels designed to mimic natural sunlight, and the walls displayed rotating images of peaceful landscapes from various worlds. Her wounded arm had healed completely, leaving only the memory of pain and the persistent question of why. She shared the recovery ward with both human and Zeridian wounded, an arrangement that should have been impossible according to everything she knew about human nature. Yet here they were, enemy soldiers lying side by side, receiving identical care from the same medical staff. The humans wore the same concerned expressions when treating Zeridian patients as they did their own kind. Dr. Sarah Chen, the chief medical officer, had been particularly attentive to the Zeridian casualties. The small human woman moved between beds with practiced efficiency, checking readings, adjusting treatments, and offering words of comfort in surprisingly fluent Zeridian. When Zara had asked how she learned the language, Dr. Chen had simply smiled and said she believed healing required understanding. "Your respiratory system is functioning normally now," Dr. Chen announced as she completed her morning examination of Zara. "The plasma burns have healed without scarring. You should be ready for light duty tomorrow if you wish." Zara nodded, though the concept of duty had become complicated. She was technically a prisoner of war, yet no one treated her as such. She was free to move about the medical bay, to speak with other patients, to access the ship's library databases. The humans seemed more concerned with her recovery than with extracting military secrets. Through the large viewport beside her bed, she could see the debris field where their fleets had clashed. Human salvage crews worked alongside Zeridian survivors to recover bodies from both sides. She watched in fascination as enemy soldiers who had been trying to kill each other days before now cooperated in the grim task of honoring the dead. Lieutenant Commander Jackson, a human pilot recovering from radiation exposure, noticed her interest. His bed was positioned next to hers, and they had been cautious neighbors for the past 2 days. "First time seeing a joint recovery operation?" he asked, his voice still rough from the treatments. "We were taught that humans desecrate the bodies of their enemies," Zara admitted, immediately regretting the words. But Jackson didn't seem offended. "Some humans probably do," he replied thoughtfully. "Some Zeridians probably do too. War brings out the worst in people, but it can also bring out the best. Depends on what kind of person you choose to be." Through the viewport, they watched as a human recovery team carefully extracted a Zeridian pilot from a damaged fighter. The team worked with reverent precision, treating the fallen warrior's body with the same respect they would show their own dead. The pilot's personal effects were carefully collected and sealed in a preservation container that would be returned to his family. "Captain Thorne lost his younger brother in the Vega system," Jackson continued. "Zeridian forces took no prisoners that day. Most commanders would use that as justification for revenge. Thorne chose a different path." Zara turned to study the human's face. "What path?" "He decided that someone had to break the cycle. That someone had to choose mercy, even when mercy hadn't been shown to them. Otherwise, the war just continues forever and everybody's brothers and sisters keep dying." The words settled in Zara's mind like seeds in fertile soil. She thought of her own losses, of friends who had died in human attacks, of the anger that had driven her to volunteer for this mission. Had they died so that more could die? Was vengeance the only legacy they would leave behind? A commotion near the ward's entrance drew their attention. A group of Zeridian officers was being escorted in, led by Commander Vilex, Zara's former squadron leader. He was uninjured, but his face bore the haggard expression of defeat. His eyes swept the ward, taking in the impossible scene of humans caring for Zeridian wounded. When his gaze fell on Zara, his expression hardened with disgust. "Lieutenant Kess," he said, his voice carrying across the quiet ward. "I see you've made yourself comfortable among the enemy." Zara felt her cheeks burn with shame, but Dr. Chen stepped between them before she could respond. "Commander Vilex, welcome to the medical bay. If you're injured, we'll be happy to treat you. If you're here to disturb my patient's recovery, you'll need to leave." "Your patients?" Vilex's voice dripped with contempt. "These are Zeridian warriors, not your pets. They should be planning escape, not accepting charity from murderers." Several human staff members had gathered nearby, but none of them appeared angry at the insults. Instead, they looked sad, almost pitying. It was Dr. Chen who spoke next, her voice gentle but firm. "Commander, your people fought bravely. Many of them were critically injured defending their ship. We've saved 17 Zeridian lives in the past 3 days, including Lieutenant Kess. Would you prefer we had let them die? Better dead with honor than alive as collaborators," Vilex snapped. The silence that followed was deafening. Zara felt the weight of every eye in the ward upon her. Here was the moment of truth. The choice between the old hatred and something new. She could rejoin her commander's anger, could reject the mercy she had been shown, could retreat into the familiar comfort of enmity. Instead, she stood slowly, her healed body strong and steady. "Commander Vilex," she said clearly, "these humans saved my life when they could have easily taken it. They've treated our wounded with the same skill and compassion they show their own. If that makes me a collaborator, then I choose collaboration over the alternative." Vilex's face contorted with rage, but before he could respond, Captain Thorne entered the ward. The human commander's presence filled the room with quiet authority. He moved to stand beside Dr. Chen, his eyes meeting Vilex's without hostility. "Commander," Thorne said simply, "you're welcome here as my guest, not my prisoner. Your people fought with courage, and they deserve respect. But if you cannot show that same respect to those who are healing your wounded, then perhaps you should consider whether your pride is worth more than their lives." The challenge hung in the air between them, not a threat but an invitation to choose what kind of leader Vilex wanted to be. Around them, humans and Zeridians alike waited to see which path he would take. Commander Vilex stood frozen for long moments, his pride warring with pragmatism. Around him, wounded Zeridian soldiers watched their leader grapple with a choice that would define not just his own fate, but potentially the future of both species. Zara could see the conflict in his eyes, the same struggle she had faced when Captain Thorne first showed her mercy. "You expect me to believe this kindness comes without a price?" Vilex finally asked, his voice quieter but still edged with suspicion. "What do you want from us, human?" Captain Thorne moved to the central viewport, gazing out at the debris field where recovery operations continued. "I want the same thing you do, Commander. I want to go home. I want my people to live without fear. I want children to grow up in a galaxy where they don't have to become soldiers." "Pretty words," Vilex replied, but some of the venom had left his tone. "Yet here we are, light years from home, bleeding in the darkness between stars." "Yes," Thorne agreed simply. "Here we are. The question is what we do next." Dr. Chen cleared her throat gently. "Commander Vilex, if I may suggest, perhaps you'd like to see our xenobiology lab. We've been studying Zeridian physiology to better treat your wounded. Your insights could help us save more lives." Zara watched as her former commander wrestled with the offer. In Zeridian military doctrine, sharing biological information with an enemy was tantamount to treason. Yet the doctor's genuine desire to heal was unmistakable. Slowly, almost reluctantly, Vilex nodded. As they departed for the lab, Zara found herself alone with Lieutenant Commander Jackson again. The human pilot was studying her with curious eyes. "That couldn't have been easy," he said, "standing up to your commanding officer like that. In Zeridian society, loyalty to the chain of command is everything," Zara explained, settling back into her bed. "I may have just destroyed my military career. Or started a new one," Jackson suggested. "Have you considered that maybe your real career isn't in making war, but in making peace?" The thought was revolutionary. Zara had been a soldier since adolescence, trained from childhood to fight humanity's expansion into Zeridian space. Peace had always seemed like a distant dream, something that might exist after total victory. The possibility that peace could be built rather than won had never occurred to her. "Tell me about Earth," she found herself saying. Not the propaganda version. The real place. Jackson's face lit up with genuine warmth. It's beautiful. Blue oceans, white clouds, continents of green and brown. We have cities that stretch to the sky and wilderness areas where you can walk for days without seeing another soul. The sunsets are orange and red and purple all at once. It sounds like Paradise Prime, Zara murmured, thinking of her homeworld's legendary beauty. Maybe they're not so different, Jackson mused. Paradise Prime is supposed to have crystal spires and floating gardens, right? I always wondered if the stories were true. They are, Zara confirmed. The gardens respond to your emotions, blooming brighter when you're happy, dimming when you're sad. As children, we would play games trying to make entire groves light up with laughter. They talked through the day, cycle, sharing stories of their homeworlds, their families, their dreams from before the war. Zara learned that Jackson had been an artist before enlisting, painting landscapes of distant worlds he'd never seen. She told him about her work as a teacher, how she'd guided young Zeridians in their first understanding of the galaxy beyond their world. When Dr. Chen returned with Commander Vilex hours later, both were deep in animated discussion about protein synthesis and cellular regeneration. The Zeridian commander looked different somehow, less rigid, as if some burden had been lifted from his shoulders. Lieutenant Kess, Vilex said formally, Dr. Chen has shown me something remarkable. The humans have been developing medical treatments specifically designed to help our species recover from their weapons. They've been working on this for months, long before this battle. Zara sat up straighter. I don't understand. Captain Thorne, who had accompanied them, stepped forward. Our medical corps has been studying every casualty report from this conflict, not to find weaknesses to exploit, but to find ways to heal the damage we've caused. Dr. Chen's team has developed 17 new treatments for injuries caused by human weapon systems. But why? Vilex asked, the question that seemed to drive everything. Why invest resources in healing the enemy? Because we're not enemies, Thorne replied. We're neighbors. Neighbors who've been fighting over territory neither of us really needs when there's an entire galaxy out there waiting to be explored together. Dr. Chen pulled up a holographic display showing star charts of the local sector. Look at this region, she said, highlighting an area beyond both human and Zeridian space. 17 systems with habitable worlds, rich in resources neither of our species requires. We could spend centuries fighting over the border systems, or we could spend those centuries building something magnificent out there. The scope of the vision was staggering. Zara found herself imagining Zeridian crystal gardens growing on alien worlds, human architecture rising alongside traditional Zeridian spires, children of both species playing together in the universal language of laughter. The Earth Defense Council has authorized me to make a proposal, Thorne continued. A joint colonization mission, human engineering and Zeridian environmental science, working together to terraform new worlds. Real cooperation, not conquest. Vilex was silent for a long time, studying the star charts with the intensity he had once reserved for battle plans. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with the weight of possibility. Such a proposal would need to be presented to the High Council on Paradise Prime. Even then, there would be tremendous resistance. Too many on both sides profit from this war. All the more reason to show them there's a better way, Jackson interjected from his bed. One successful colony, one proof that our species can build, together instead of tear apart, could change everything. Zara felt something shifting inside her, a fundamental reorientation of purpose. Commander, she said carefully, what if we were the ones to present this proposal? What if surviving members of both crews volunteered for the first joint mission? The Iker suggestion hung in the air like a challenge to destiny itself. They were wounded warriors in the aftermath of battle, representatives of species that had been killing each other for generations. Yet here they sat, humans and Zeridians together, imagining a future where their children might know only peace. Outside the viewport, the recovery teams continued their grim work. But now Zara saw something different in their cooperation. She saw not just the honoring of the dead, but the foundation of something living and new. The proposal took shape over the following weeks as the combined survivor crews worked together aboard Captain Thorne's vessel. What had begun as a desperate suggestion in a medical bay had evolved into a comprehensive plan that challenged everything both species thought they knew about the other. Zara found herself appointed as the Zeridian representative on the planning committee, working alongside Dr. Chen, Lieutenant Commander Jackson, and Captain Thorne himself. Commander Vilix had agreed to the arrangement with surprising enthusiasm, perhaps recognizing that his young lieutenant possessed the flexibility of mind needed for such unprecedented cooperation. The conference room they'd commandeered buzzed with constant activity. Holographic displays showed detailed surveys of the target system, Kepler 442, a star system with 3 potentially habitable worlds and an asteroid belt rich in rare minerals. The planets were designated as Harmony, Unity, and Hope, names chosen jointly by human and Zeridian committees to represent their shared aspirations. The atmospheric processors will need to run for 18 months on Harmony before it's suitable for permanent settlement, Dr. Chen explained, manipulating the 3-dimensional model of their primary target world. But the Zeridian bioadaptation technology could reduce that to 6 months. Zara studied the readouts with growing excitement. Our botanical engineers could introduce symbiotic plant networks that would accelerate the terraforming process naturally. The ecosystem would be more stable than anything created by mechanical means alone. And human industrial capabilities could provide the infrastructure needed to support large-scale agriculture, Jackson added. We're talking about cities that could feed millions powered entirely by renewable energy. Captain Thorne leaned back in his chair, observing the animated discussion with satisfaction. The engineering challenges are significant, but not insurmountable. The real challenge will be political. Both our governments have built their power structures around this conflict. The truth of his words settled over the room like a cold shadow. The war between humanity and the Zeridian collective had created entire industries, military hierarchies, and political movements on both sides. Peace would threaten powerful interests that had grown wealthy on conflict. Perhaps that's why this has to come from us, Zara suggested. Not from politicians or generals, but from soldiers who've seen what war really costs. We can't just propose peace, we have to prove it's possible. Over the following days, their plans grew more detailed and ambitious. They designed integrated living spaces where human functionality merged with Zeridian aesthetics. They planned research facilities where scientists from both species could collaborate on projects that would benefit all. They even outlined educational systems where human and Zeridian children would learn together, growing up with an understanding that their differences were strengths rather than threats. The breakthrough came when Chief Engineer Martinez, a human who had initially been skeptical of the entire project, presented his analysis of Zeridian crystal technology. I've been studying the resonance patterns in their communication crystals, he explained excitedly. If we can integrate this with our quantum communication arrays, we could create instantaneous communication networks across the entire sector. Zara's eyes widened as she grasped the implications. Real-time communication would eliminate most of the misunderstandings that lead to conflict. Disputes could be resolved through immediate dialogue instead of military action. More than that, Dr. Chen added, her scientific mind racing ahead. We could share medical knowledge instantaneously. A breakthrough on one world could save lives across the sector within minutes. The project was becoming more than just a colonial venture. It was evolving into a model for how two species could not only coexist but thrive together. Each challenge they solved revealed new possibilities, new ways that human and Zeridian capabilities could complement each other. But their enthusiasm was tempered by sobering reports from the broader war. While they planned for peace, the conflict continued to rage across a dozen star systems. Each day brought news of new battles, more casualties, deeper hatred on both sides. The urgency of their mission became more apparent with each passing report. We need a demonstration, Vilix announced during one particularly grim briefing session. Something visible enough to catch the attention of both high councils, dramatic enough to force them to consider alternatives to endless war. Captain Thorne nodded slowly. I've been thinking the same thing. What if we took a small team to Kepler 442, a joint mission to establish the foundation of a colony? Proof of concept. That would be incredibly dangerous, Jackson pointed out. If either government decides we're traitors, we'd be on our own out there. No support, no reinforcements, no way home if things go wrong. Then we'd better make sure things go right, Zara replied with more confidence than she felt. How many people would we need for a viable demonstration? They spent hours analyzing the requirements. A skeleton crew could establish basic infrastructure and begin the terraforming process, but they would need specialists from both species. Dr. Chen would be essential for medical support and biological research. Engineer Martinez could handle the technical integration challenges. They would need botanists, geologists, communications experts, and security personnel. 50 humans, 50 Zeridians, Thorne concluded. Enough to prove the concept, small enough to avoid detection until we're ready to reveal what we've accomplished. The magnitude of what they were contemplating began to sink in. They were talking about abandoning their military careers, leaving behind everything familiar, to bet their lives on the possibility that two species could build something better together than they could apart. There's something else to consider, Violet said quietly. If this succeeds, if we actually prove that cooperation is possible, there will be those on both sides who see us as a threat to their power. We won't just be explorers or colonists. We'll be revolutionaries. The word hung in the air with all its implications. They weren't just proposing to build a colony. They were proposing to build a future that would challenge the fundamental assumptions upon which both their civilizations had been operating. Zara looked around the room at the faces of humans and Zeridians, who had somehow become her closest allies. These people who should have been her enemies had become her hope for tomorrow. Then we'd better build something worth the revolution, she said softly. Outside the viewport, the stars waited in their ancient patience, indifferent to the small dramas of war and peace that played out among the children of distant suns. But for the first time since the conflict began, those stars seemed to promise not just distant light, but a destination where that light might guide them home. The recruitment process proved both easier and more difficult than they had anticipated. Word of the joint colony project spread quietly through the combined crews, carried in hushed conversations between humans and Zeridians, who had learned to see past their species' differences. Many were intrigued by the possibility of building rather than destroying, but few were willing to abandon everything they had known for an uncertain future among the stars. Dr. Chen found unexpected enthusiasm among the medical staff. Human and Zeridian medics had been working together so closely that the species barrier had become almost invisible to them. They understood better than anyone how similar their peoples actually were beneath the surface differences. Lieutenant Morrison wants to join, she reported to the planning committee. So do Dr. Veltar and Nurse Williams. They've seen firsthand how well our medical knowledge complements each other. Engineer Martinez had similar success with the technical crews. The Zeridian engineers are fascinated by our manufacturing capabilities, he explained. And frankly, their understanding of energy resonance makes our technology look primitive. Chief Engineer Krixval thinks we could improve our power efficiency by 60% using hybrid designs. But for every volunteer, there were 3 who declined. The fear of being branded traitors by their own governments weighed heavily on many minds. Others simply couldn't overcome generations of conditioning that labeled the other species as irredeemably hostile. The breakthrough came when Specialist Torres, a young human botanist, approached Zara directly. Ma'am, I've been studying the plant samples from Paradise Prime that Dr. Chen provided. The symbiotic relationships in Zeridian ecosystems could revolutionize agriculture across the galaxy. This isn't just about building a colony. This is about feeding billions of people more efficiently. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and soon other scientists began to see the project not as political rebellion, but as the greatest research opportunity in galactic history. The chance to work with an entirely different scientific tradition, to combine human innovation with Zeridian wisdom, drew academics from both species who cared more about discovery than politics. Captain Thorne faced his own challenges recruiting security personnel. Military discipline made soldiers naturally suspicious of actions that could be construed as desertion or treason. But gradually a core group emerged, veterans who had grown weary of fighting, young officers who had begun to question the purpose of endless war, survivors who had been saved by enemy compassion and wanted to return that gift. Sergeant Kim volunteered, Thorne reported during one of their evening briefings. She lost her brother in the Centauri campaign, but she says she'd rather honor his memory by building something than by taking revenge. Zara nodded, understanding the sentiment completely. She thought often of her own losses, friends who had died believing they were protecting their homeworld from human expansion. Perhaps this colony could be a memorial to them as well, proof that their sacrifice had meaning beyond perpetuating conflict. Commander Vilex had been working his own networks among the Zeridian survivors, appealing to those who had begun to question the wisdom of their leaders' strategies. His reputation as a decorated officer gave him credibility with soldiers who might otherwise dismiss peace talk as weakness. "Lieutenant Zensha wants to join us," he announced one day with obvious pride. "She's our best atmospheric engineer. With her expertise, we could have breathable air on Harmony within 3 months instead of 6. The team was slowly taking shape, but they faced a crucial logistical problem. They needed supplies, equipment, and transportation for 100 volunteers on a mission that couldn't officially exist. The resources required were substantial, and any attempt to requisition them through normal channels would immediately alert both governments to their plans. The solution came from an unexpected source. Chief Quartermaster Davidson, a grizzled human veteran who had been managing supplies for the combined crews, approached Captain Thorne with a carefully prepared proposal. "Sir, I've been tracking our resource usage since the battle," he explained, spreading out detailed logistics reports. "We've been allocated emergency provisions for extended operations. If we're careful about it, we can redirect enough supplies to support a small colonial expedition without raising red flags. That's a court-martial offense." "Chief," Thorne pointed out, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely opposed to the idea. "Yes, sir, it is," Davidson agreed calmly. "But so is everything else we're planning. Might as well be hanged for a sheep as a lamb." Zara found herself impressed by the human's pragmatic acceptance of consequences. It was a very human trait she was learning, the willingness to accept enormous personal risk for the sake of a principle or goal. Zeridian culture emphasized collective wisdom and careful consensus building, but humans seemed capable of making individual leaps of faith that could transform entire situations. With Davidson managing the logistics and Dr. Chen coordinating personnel, the practical aspects of the mission began to crystallize. They would need a ship capable of interstellar travel, but small enough to avoid detection. They would need construction equipment, atmospheric processors, communication arrays, and enough supplies to sustain 100 people for at least 6 months. The cargo vessel Endeavor could work, Engineer Martinez suggested during one of their late-night planning sessions. "It's scheduled for decommission next month, but the engines are solid and the cargo capacity is enormous. Can you get access to it without authorization?" Thorne asked. Martinez grinned. "Sir, I've been maintaining that ship for 3 years. I know every bolt and circuit, and it just so happens that Lieutenant Commander Jackson here is certified to pilot heavy cargo vessels." Jackson raised an eyebrow. "Are you volunteering me for Grand Theft spacecraft?" "I prefer to think of it as unauthorized borrowing for the good of galactic civilization," Martinez replied with mock dignity. The planning sessions had evolved from desperate hope to detailed preparation. They had routes mapped, supply lists compiled, personnel assignments drafted, and contingency plans for dozens of potential complications. But beneath all the practical details lay a more fundamental question that none of them had directly addressed. "What happens if we succeed?" Zara asked one evening as they reviewed their final preparations. "What happens if we actually build a functioning colony where humans and Zeridians work together? Both our governments will see it as a threat to their authority." Captain Thorne set down his datapad and looked around the room at the faces of the conspirators who had become his closest allies. "Then we'll have to be prepared to defend what we've built. Not with weapons, we've all seen where that leads, but with evidence, with proof that there's a better way." "And if they refuse to listen?" Commander Vilex asked quietly. "Then we keep building," Dr. Chen replied with quiet determination. "We invite others to join us. We show the galaxy that peace isn't just a dream, it's a choice. And eventually, enough people will make that choice to change everything." Outside their planning room, the stars wheeled in their eternal dance, indifferent to the small hopes and fears of mortal beings. But for 100 volunteers from 2 species that had been enemies since first contact, those stars no longer represented the vast emptiness between worlds. They represented possibility. 6 months later, Zara stood on the observation deck of New Harmony Station, watching the first Zeridian children play with human youngsters in the gravity-controlled recreation areas. The sight still filled her with wonder, even after witnessing hundreds of small miracles during the colony's rapid development. The journey to Kepler 4I-42 had been fraught with tension. They had slipped away from the battle zone in the dead of night, using the Endeavor's outdated but functional stealth systems to avoid detection by patrol vessels from both fleets. For 3 weeks, 100 volunteers had lived in cramped quarters, sharing resources and stories while traveling toward an uncertain future. The first glimpse of Harmony had been breathtaking. The world was slightly smaller than Earth, with vast oceans and continents covered in primitive vegetation that showed remarkable compatibility with both human and Zeridian biological requirements. Dr. Chen's preliminary surveys had proven accurate. The planet was a natural candidate for terraforming, requiring only atmospheric adjustment and the introduction of more complex ecosystems. But the real magic had happened when they began to build together. Human engineering efficiency, combined with Zeridian environmental sensitivity, had produced architecture unlike anything either species had created alone. The main settlement sprawled across a coastal plain, its buildings rising in graceful curves that seemed to grow from the landscape itself. Solar collectors designed by human engineers were enhanced with Zeridian crystal resonance technology, producing energy with near-perfect efficiency. Water recycling systems incorporated biological filtration methods that left the processed water cleaner than many natural sources. The agricultural yields are exceeding all projections, Specialist Torres reported, joining Zara at the viewing window. The young botanist had become the colony's chief agricultural coordinator, overseeing farms where human crops grew alongside Zeridian symbiotic gardens. The intercropping techniques are producing 60% more food per hectare than either species achieves separately. Through the transparent aluminum, they could see the terraced farms stretching toward the inland hills. Human grain fields alternated with Zeridian biogardens, creating a patchwork of colors and textures that was both beautiful and practical. The symbiotic relationships between different plant species had eliminated the need for most pesticides while actually enriching the soil. "Any word from the communication array?" Zara asked, though she knew the answer would be the same as always. Torres shook her head. "Commander Jackson's team got the quantum relay operational yesterday, but we're maintaining communication silence until the demonstration is ready. Captain Thorne wants to present both governments with a fait accompli, rather than giving them time to interfere." The colony had been carefully designed to be self-sufficient and defensible, but not through military means. Their defense lay in their value. They were producing scientific breakthroughs, agricultural innovations, and cultural exchanges that would benefit billions across the galaxy. Any government that destroyed such an achievement would face the outrage of their own people. More importantly, they had invited observers. "The journalists should arrive next week," Torres continued. "Independent reporters from 12 different worlds, including some from the neutral zone. Captain Thorne thinks their coverage will make it impossible for either government to suppress news of what we've accomplished." Zara nodded, feeling the familiar mixture of excitement and nervousness that had become her constant companion. They were about to reveal their secret to the galaxy, gambling everything on the hope that public opinion would protect them from retaliation. A chime from the intercom interrupted her thoughts. "All senior staff to the main conference room," Captain Thorne's voice announced. "We've received a priority transmission." Zara and Torres exchanged worried glances before hurrying to the conference center. The main room had been designed as a perfect fusion of human and Zeridian architectural principles, with flowing lines that created a sense of harmony while maintaining the functional efficiency both species. The senior staff had assembled quickly, human and Zeridian department heads sitting side by side around the central conference table. Dr. Chen was studying a datapad with obvious concern, while Engineer Martinez worked at the holographic display controls. Captain Thorne entered with Commander Vilex, both men wearing expressions of grim determination. "We've intercepted communications between the Earth Defense Council and the Zeridian High Command," Thorne announced without preamble. "Both governments know we're here." A ripple of tension went through the assembled group, but no one seemed surprised. They had always known discovery was inevitable. The question was whether they would have time to prove their concept before political pressure forced them to abandon their dream. What are their intentions? Dr. Chen asked calmly. Both sides are demanding our immediate return, Vilex replied. They're classifying this as an unauthorized military operation and threatening court-martial proceedings for all personnel involved. Are they sending ships to retrieve us? Asked Lieutenant Commander Jackson, who had become the colony's chief pilot and transportation coordinator. Not yet, Thorne said. I think they're hoping we'll come back voluntarily, rather than forcing a confrontation that could become public. Both governments are aware that news of our success could undermine their war efforts. Engineer Martinez activated the holographic display, showing recent communication intercepts and intelligence reports. There's something else, he said quietly. There have been peace demonstrations on 17 human worlds and 12 Zeridian colonies. Word of our project has leaked somehow, and civilian populations are demanding to know why their governments haven't pursued similar cooperative ventures. Zara felt a surge of hope mixed with trepidation. Public pressure was exactly what they had hoped for, but it also made them targets for those who profited from continued conflict. The war profiteers won't sit still for this, Dr. Chen observed. Military contractors, weapons manufacturers, political factions whose power depends on maintaining the enemy threat. They all have reasons to see us fail. Then we need to move faster, Thorne decided. How soon can we be ready for the media demonstration? Torres consulted her datapad. The agricultural displays are complete, the technological integration demos are functional, and the cultural exchange programs are operating smoothly. We could host the journalists tomorrow if necessary. Then that's what we'll do, Vilex agreed. Once our story is public, both governments will find it much more difficult to suppress what we've accomplished. Over the next 18 hours, the colony transformed into a showcase of interspecies cooperation. Human engineers worked alongside Zeridian artists to create visual presentations that would demonstrate their achievements to visitors who might not understand the technical details. Children from both species practiced cultural performances that highlighted their natural friendship despite their parents' historical enmity. When the journalists arrived, they found not a desperate group of deserters hiding from military justice, but a thriving community that had achieved in 6 months what centuries of warfare had failed to accomplish. The reporters were given complete access to every aspect of the colony: the integrated living spaces, the revolutionary agricultural systems, the joint research projects that were producing breakthrough discoveries monthly. But the most powerful testimony came from the colonists themselves. I lost my brother to a Zeridian attack 5 years ago, Sergeant Kim told a reporter from Earth News Network. I came here thinking I'd honor his memory by proving humans and Zeridians could work together. Now I know he'd be proud of what we're building. Dr. Veltar, the Zeridian medical officer, spoke with equal conviction to a journalist from the Collective Broadcasting Service. My clutch sister died defending a medical station from human raiders. But here human and Zeridian medics save lives together every day. This is how we honor our fallen, by ensuring no one else has to die for their children's mistakes. The story spread across the galaxy with the speed of quantum communication, carried not just by official news networks but by civilian bloggers, independent journalists, and social media influencers who recognized the historical significance of what they were witnessing. As Zara watched the reports being transmitted to every corner of known space, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. It had begun with a moment of unexpected mercy in the aftermath of battle, when a human captain had chosen healing over vengeance. That single act of compassion had grown into something that might transform the galaxy. The stars outside her window no longer looked cold and distant. They looked like destinations, worlds where human and Zeridian children might one day play together under alien suns, building wonders their parents could never have imagined. The war was not over, but for the first time since contact between their species, peace seemed not just possible but inevitable, and it had all begun when she braced for death at the hands of a human, only to discover that his mercy could change everything.